themselves, let alone how much energy would be cost effective for procuring said food. This privilege was brought on by the invention of farming, which came around 10 to 12,000 years ago, and would shape the fate of humanity for the better following this groundbreaking event. This progression did not happen overnight, and instead took multiple millennia for humans to reap the true benefits of the increased food productivity associated with farming. Prior to the Neolithic Revolution, humans survived on a method defined as foraging, hunting, and gathering, which entailed humans searching for wild resources. This lifestyle naturally resulted in humans being highly mobile creatures, who were regularly on the move, searching from place to place for resources to survive. Although they moved from place to place, their movements were not sporadic and had to do with seasonal change. And these locations were part of a larger network of sites they found to be profitable for living off of. Notable examples of these foraging societies could be demonstrated by the Cabaran and geometric Cabaran, with the subtle difference between the two being that the geometric Cabaran used microliths that were geometric in shape, or the Natufians, who would go on to be another foraging society, but they practiced a different kind. Instead of being mobile, they were more sedentary in nature, remaining in villages year round. The emergence of the Natufian society occurred when the climate was beginning to improve around 15,000 years ago. They would begin at first appearing in the Jordan Valley because of its good access to water and subsistence resources. But however, by the beginning of the Younger Dryas, asceticism decreased due to the harsh environments that featured less stable weather and unfavorable growing conditions for vegetation. However, it is important to note that a place near this region, Abu Huraira 1, was a site where sedentary foraging did take place, and instead of decreasing in population and people beginning to leave, going back to mobile foraging, they experienced a population growth, which was in part due to the influx of mobile foragers entering the community. The Tufians would eventually come back around, and they would begin thriving upon acorns and hunted gazelle, and about by 9,000 years ago, they would eventually begin cultivating grains and domesticating animals like sheep and goats. Many presume that humans had long held some level of knowledge to cultivate lands before they made the necessary actions to do so, given their continuous interactions with the environment that could and would lead to a better understanding of how to manipulate it. This could be demonstrated by humans accidentally burning lands through a conscious effort as well, possibly. And they would notice the post benefits on the vegetation of that place. The exact reason as to why humans made the eventual switch from foraging to farming is not definitively known. What is known, however, is that it had to be a good one, given that foraging has supported people for thousands of years. Some argue that overpopulation required a new form of food production, so the advent of farming would become a remedy for this issue of the lack of carrying capacity for that environment, which was supported by naturally occurring resources. Another possibility was environmental pressures, which argues that places not abundant in diversity and overall vegetation force inhabitants to seek sufficient alternatives from hunting and gathering. Given the overall improvement of climate that occurred around the onset of the Holocene and the adoption of farming around this time, the largest overarching reason as to why humans would begin to adopt agriculture is because of the overall improvement of climate, which allowed for things like more abundance of resources to take place. It's important to note that these other abundances of resources will create a certain kind of foraging known as broad spectrum foraging, which combined a diversity of foods for a diet. And there are other theories that coincide with the idea of climate change being the reason why humans began to adopt farming. One belief is that institutional change was imperative for farming to take fold and become truly profitable. Foraging naturally takes on the practice of sharing one's profits with the surrounding individuals rather than keeping and protecting them from those who did not play a role in the collection of said resources. This cultural norm would have made farming less attractive as a food collection method because it would have opened the door for people in the foraging community to come around during harvesting season and just take your stuff. An example of this could be demonstrated by two Batek men of a foraging society who took measures to cultivate rice, but their efforts were thwarted when people in the group began taking the yields and dispersing it amongst each other without permission. A remedy for this problem of sharing would have been the emergence of sedentism, which the Natufians I earlier mentioned practiced, which was defined to be the year-round stay at a particular location. With an improved climate, constantly moving would have been less necessary, so sedentism would be able to take fold. By more foraging societies becoming sedentary ones, humans were one step closer to creating conditions that would be sufficient for the creation of the cultural norms that favored farming. Additionally, under sedentism, permanent communities could develop, which feature settlement and infrastructure such as burials and dwellings, which would show that humans had given a strenuous efforts to maintain land that they inhabited. Another issue of early farming would have been the decreased productivity compared to foraging, particularly broad spectrum foraging, which could be found in areas like the hilly flanks of Southwest Asia, which were essentially places of higher altitude that surrounded the Fertile Crescent. This lack of productivity is supported through experiments in which modern day foraging yields places, particularly that were not desirable for hunter-gatherer lifestyles, outperforming farming yields that were conducted with tools present during the onset of the agricultural revolution. Continuing on, the first farmers that would come to be known and documented in the historical record were found at Abu Huraira II, which was the second phase of the site of Abu Huraira, in which people would begin cultivating lands instead of being foraging societies that were sedentary. Although they did obviously keep their sedentary lifestyle as they were farmers now. The productivity of farming would go on to naturally improve as time went on. This was a result of inadvertent and conscious genetic alteration in vegetation, otherwise known as domestication, which increased grain sizes, essentially made yields more efficient, and required human interaction to ensure their reproduction. It's also important to know that this would have decreased the amount of time that it took for harvesting season. Important innovation would have been the introduction of pottery for functional purposes in the Near East, which would have significantly increased the productivity of farming by allowing people to use structures for cooking and storing food, which would make surpluses even more important to that community. Tool innovation for harvesting crops would improve, all allowing for tasks to be more profitable and decreasing the substantiality of the losses associated with reaping the benefits of growing crops and freeing up laborers as well. The advent of farming was in a multitude of places all across the globe, but the first instance documented, as previously stated, was in the Middle East. As such, it seems only right to continue on highlighting the significant events that agriculture produced, particularly in this region. More advanced Neolithic economies, otherwise better put, agrarian societies, would outperform the ones covered in broad spectrum foraging and brought with it a host of abilities for human innovation. The first ever recorded civilization, Sumer, which was a collection of city-states essentially, arose around 4100 BCE. But it is important to note that there is a predecessor to them that appeared around 5000 BCE, but there's little information on them, but they were known as the Ubaid. The Sumer civilization would end around 1750 BCE. The civilization was located in southern Mesopotamia between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, which allowed for them to thrive in an environment that was arid and wasn't particularly conditioned for growth and civilization. The first notable period of the Sumer civilization was the Uruk period, which featured the development of cities that were likely villages during the Ubaid period. One of the most notable cities was Uruk, which was considered to be the first ever city created, but the Sumer people believed that Eridu to be the first city ever. Sumer civilization thrived upon agricultural surpluses, which was created by efficient farming techniques, and allowed people to free themselves up to do other things, which was an important part in the step of human civilization, as It gave humans the opportunity to focus on other things and become experts, not just in survival, but other aspects of life. They would begin this thing called craft specialization, where they would take up different focuses and become better at them. This could be demonstrated by the Sumer civilization becoming the inventors of time, in which the concept of a day was separated between 12-hour periods, and 60 minutes was an hour, and 60 seconds was a minute. In addition to this, they created the first formal writing system ever documented, what was cuneiform. Also, they created arithmetic and geometry as well as the will. Important innovation a part of Sumerian society was irrigation. As aforementioned, this this particular climate that they were in was not the most favorable, so water control and exploitation was a very important part of living. Through documentation, it was found that there was multiple scripts written in cuneiform during the last dynasty of the Sumer civilization, Ur the Third, which outlined projects that involved the revitalization and creation of structures meant for directing water to particular sites for use and increasing water levels. The particular structures were considered barrages, and they were meant for navigation, which could be used for transporting goods. The projects that were detailed to the point that they included the month they occurred, the duration, and the size of the workforce who could monitor the laborers, sanction the infrastructure, and development. Without the intervention from the local government, the Ur dynasty wouldn't have flourished and became such an important aspect of the Sumer society, eventually getting the name of the Sumerian Renaissance. The control of water allowed people to survive in an unfavorable place and live throughout their days, focusing on other aspects, not just on surviving. It is important to note that there was a large majority of inhabitants who lived within cities during the time of the Sumer civilization. In closing, the importance of agriculture on human society led to the development of civilizations, which created a whole host of possibilities for humans to focus on different aspects of life. They were able to create important inventions that we now find today and take for granted, and all but launched human civilization to another level that could never be imagined with broad spectrum foraging.